Okay, so can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
And have you guys all been able to set up a Scratch account?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So part of the reason why we decided to go with Scratch this year, I don't know if you were some of the groups that participated in Spark last year, but we did things a little bit differently last year, and some of the feedback that we got was that it was just a little too over some of the teachers' heads, and then we split the groups into one touch develop group, and then the other group was HTML and CSS and things like that, and they just didn't have anything in common, so it felt like we were doing two separate events at the same time, and it just we didn't give the attention to everybody that we thought we wanted to give. So we got some of that feedback, and then the other thing was that the students felt like we kind of just threw a bunch of resources at them in one day and then just kind of let them go, and that wasn't enough time to go through things with them because you guys seem like you're pretty tech savvy, but some of the volunteers and some of the other teachers were not very tech savvy at all. So we're using Scratch this year to kind of teach kids how to program, and if you guys haven't used Scratch before, I'm just going to go over some basics today, and then as we go through the teacher trainings in the next few weeks, we'll actually make a game with you guys. So each of you will be able to create your own game, and that way when it comes time in March for the students to do the training, you'll be able to kind of troubleshoot with them, and you'll at least have some familiarity with Scratch. So we're going to start with just a blank project. The blank Scratch projects start off, every single one, with Scratch the Cat right in the middle of this area. This is called the stage, and it's where kind of the game and the action happens. So whatever we see here, that's going to be what the final product of the game is. Okay. On the stage, we've got two buttons, a little green flag, that's kind of the go button that starts our program, just like double-clicking on an app on the computer or tapping on an app on your iPhone or something, or your mobile phone. And then stop halts the program completely. Below that, we've got our sprites, which are our characters and items. Basically anything that you can interact with in the game is referred to as a sprite. So this section here will list out all the different sprites or items that we've created. And then also what are called backdrops. Backdrops are just the levels in our game. It's what the stage looks like, the background of our levels. Okay. The next section, and this is kind of the meat and potatoes of the whole operation, is what we call the script section. It's divided into 10 different categories of scripts or blocks. And these are, if you're familiar with programming, are kind of the building blocks of any kind of code. Your loops, your variables, your functions, all that stuff happens here. If you're not familiar with programming at all, then this is just basically the steps, the instructions that we're going to give Scratch one step at a time for what to do with our characters and our sprites and with our game. Okay? On the right-hand side, this giant empty area is what we call the workspace. And this is where we're actually going to drag our blocks, just like click and drag, to basically add them to what is happening in our game. We can drag blocks off, put them on. This is where the majority of our quote-unquote programming is going to happen. So we're going to start first by just making Scratch the Cat move. We're going to move him left and right and just do some basic movement, and then we're going to kind of build upon that to get a very, very simple, very, very basic game done within the next 20 to 30 minutes. Okay? All right. So our motion blocks here on the side kind of start off with your very, very basic movement up, down, left, and right. And all the movement is done using a combination of these move 10 steps blocks, the turn blocks, which actually rotate the character. We can point our character in different directions. And if you actually want to try any of these blocks, you can just double-click on them. Double-clicking on them will move that character or do whatever that block says. So in this case, he's moving 10 steps to the right. If we want to move the character 10 steps to the left, we can change that number to a negative number, and then double-click on it to move the character to the left. Okay. The Scratch stage is set up a lot like a XY coordinate grid. So the very middle of the stage is coordinate 0, 0. If you look in the upper right-hand corner here, you'll see a little ghosted figure of Scratch the Cat along with X equals 0 and Y equals 0. That basically just tells you the current XY coordinates of whatever sprite you have highlighted. So as we add more, you'll be able to see them. But if I double-click on these, you'll notice how Scratch's coordinates change to negative, positive, depending on what the values are in there. Does that make sense so far? Mm-hmm. So I'm going to start him at 0, 0, but I can also drag him around the stage just by clicking on him anywhere in the stage. And one of the things that you'll notice as I'm doing that is that some of these blocks in the block section or in the script section actually update with his new position as I move him. So this block, for example, the go-to block, if we put that into our workspace, what that does is no matter where I put Scratch the Cat, if I double-click on that block, it'll send him right back to wherever he was when I put that block onto the stage. So we'll actually use this block pretty often on all of our different characters to do what's called a reset. We'll reset our stage or our level of our game so that it just puts everything back to the way it was when the game started. Does that make sense so far? Okay, so what I'm going to do is just kind of set up the basics of what our game is going to look like, where Scratch the Cat is, and then I'm going to set up kind of a little activity for him to do. So now that I have Scratch kind of in the spot where I want him, I'm going to set the background for this stage or for this level. And the way to do that is I can click on the stage down here at the corner, and I'll have the ability to either choose a backdrop from Scratch's library. They have actually a pretty decent amount of backgrounds and characters and items that are already pre-made so that you don't have to go searching Google for images. I can paint a new backdrop if I want to using the paint tools. If I click on this little paintbrush here, it'll change our workspace into an artboard, and I can kind of scribble around, and then as soon as I'm done scribbling, you'll notice my stage updates. I don't really want to do that. I can also load a backdrop from a file if I have images on my computer that I want to use. We are actually, for the Spark event, going to give the students some assets that we'll have on the Spark website that are centered around Gilbert schools and locations all throughout Gilbert. So if they want to make a Gilbert-centered game, they can. And then lastly, you can use the camera on your laptop to actually take a photo if you want to put yourself in the game or if the students want to put themselves in the game. For now, we're just going to use one of the library backdrops. So I'll choose that first icon. And I'm going to use this goal, and we're just going to make a quick little soccer. I hesitate to call it a game because it's not that advanced, but we'll make a soccer backdrop. So you'll notice as soon as I pick that, it changed the background of our stage. I can actually swap between multiple backdrops here in the middle. Once I've loaded one, I can add others if I want to, and then I can also delete backdrops that I no longer want by clicking the little X next to it. So I'm going to delete that blank one, and I just want to have the soccer goal that's in there. So far, so good? Mm-hmm. Okay, so now I'm going to add another sprite, and before I do that, I want to change the name of this sprite. By default, Scratch will just name your sprites in order numerically as Sprite 1, Sprite 2, Sprite 3, Sprite 4. But once our games get a little bit more complicated, that's not going to be very easy to manage, and it's going to be hard to find some sprites. Occasionally, you may even have sprites that look similar as we get into like characters that are variations of each other. That's going to get real messy. So all I need to do is hit this little lowercase letter I for info on that sprite, and I can change the name just by typing in Scratch the Cat or whatever I want to call him. So once I hit that little back arrow, I'll have it labeled as Scratch the Cat now underneath his name. So our new sprite, obviously we have a soccer backdrop. So I'm going to make a soccer ball as our next item. And the way I can do that is just like with the backdrops, I have buttons up here in the corner of the sprites window where I can load a sprite from the Scratch library. I can paint a brand new sprite if I want to. I can load one from a file, or I can use my camera to take a picture of one. So I'm going to pick one from the Scratch library. I'm going to scroll down through all these and find the soccer ball. And what happens is because I've picked one from the library, it uses the name of the library rather than naming it as Sprite 1 or Sprite 2 or Sprite 3. If we created our own, that's where those names would come from. And just like with Scratch the Cat, I can drag this sprite around anywhere on the stage. You'll see my blocks change, the XY coordinates change as I move it around, and then our coordinates on the workspace also change, just like with Scratch. But I'm going to do something a little bit different. This ball looks completely the wrong size for Scratch. So I'm going to drag a movement block, or a motion block in, actually sorry, it's a looks block that changes the size of that sprite. So I'm going to click on the looks section under scripts. And I'm going to grab the block that says set size to 100%. And I'm going to make that 50%. I'm going to drag it onto our stage and then double click on it.
Is this how you would suggest that we start with our students too?
I would start, yeah, kind of with like the basic movements. We'll actually be doing this similar tutorial at the event and at the student training. So if you're going to be going over it with the students, you can customize this however you want. If you want them to actually make a specific type of game, then I would do that. I like this method. The reason I'm going this route is because some students might want to do a game similar to this, others might want to do a different type of game, and so this just kind of gives you the basics of how to play with the motion and stuff without kind of committing you to a very specific style of game.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now I've got my ball. I've got Scratch the Cat. They're approximately in the spaces that they want, or that we want them. So now we're going to actually do something with these characters. And the way that we do that is by using two other types of blocks called events and controls. Okay? These four blocks up at the top are kind of our primary blocks. I would say they're the most important blocks out of all of the different types in Scratch, just because most beginners will start with these and they won't even touch any of these other blocks that are available. Once you get into some more in-depth types of games, then you'll start to use these other blocks, and those introduce some higher level programming concepts like variables, which you can store different numbers or colors or different movements. You've also got operators where you can do comparisons, greater than, equal to. So those will come in a little bit later, but for now we're just going to use these top four. And events are, I would say, the simplest types of blocks that aren't directly related to sprites. If you look through the list, you'll kind of see what they are, but our very, very first event block that we're going to use is this when that flag is clicked. So this is basically the same as saying, as soon as we start our program, this is what I want to happen. So I'm going to drag this when flag is clicked, and I want to make sure, first of all, that I'm on Scratch the Cat, since he's our primary character. I want to make sure that he's clicked first, and then I drag that block into our workspace. And I'm going to take that go-to block that we created earlier and just drag that, and you'll notice that it kind of highlights that flag block and snaps to it. And all this is going to do is it's going to say, when I click that flag, do this. So that way, right when we start our game, it'll reset our whole board. So no matter what has happened in the past, we're resetting his position, and we're going to want to do the exact same thing with the soccer ball too. So we'll click on the soccer ball. we'll put our, when the game starts, set that size to 50%. And I'll also reset that position too. So I'll move the soccer ball where I want it and then drag that position block there also. This way, no matter what happens, as soon as we start our game, I can move Scratch around, I can move the ball around, and when I click the green flag, boom, they both reset to their original spots. So far, so good?
Yes.
Okay. So now it's time to actually get some motion going in the game. There's a couple different ways we can move our characters around. We've got that move steps block that we used before. So if I smack that in there and connect it to my other blocks, and I change the value to 150 steps, what you'll see happen when I click the flag is exactly kind of our recipe, our list of instructions. He's going to move back to his original spot, and then he's going to move forward 150 steps. Okay? We're going to do the same thing with the soccer ball. We're going to say, when we click the flag, change the size to 50%, go to your original starting spot, and then move however many steps. And we can play around with the number of steps and just kind of try and see how far we need to move it. I just want to move it far enough so that it gets into the goal.
So each sprite has its own stage.
It doesn't have its own stage, but it has its own workspace.
Oh, workspace. Okay, I see what you mean. Okay, yeah.
The stage is kind of where everything lives, and the workspace is the individual ones. And actually, technically, even the backdrop has its own workspace too. As we get later on into the game, you can have the backdrop, which is kind of just the general everything. It's kind of like our dump, where we put everything that's not specific to a character. We put that all in the backdrop workspace. So if you decide to, for example, have your character have a certain amount of lives, or like a high score, we can put the high score and attach it to the backdrop, and that way it's not tied to a specific character or a specific item in our screen or in our stage. Okay. So for now, I've set this up so that when we click the stage, the soccer ball resets and then goes into the goal. Scratch resets and he goes into the goal too. Whoop, did I move him? I think I might have broken it. Oh no, actually I'm not. Sorry. I forgot to point out one kind of important thing. When you set up your blocks, they all happen at exactly the same time. They don't wait for one block to finish before the next one happens. So actually this is a good example. If I take Scratch and I tell him to move 150 steps to the right and then 150 steps to the left, when I hit that arrow or the flag, that's going to happen immediately. So you'll notice he jumps right back to his starting spot. And if I double those up, I'm going to right-click and duplicate so that we have the same motion going on. You actually won't see him go through those steps. They happen immediately, all at the same time, one after the other. So some of the things that we can do is slow those down. There are control blocks that allow you to wait in between steps. But we're actually going to do something a little bit differently. So if you want, you can have him do a little dance before by dragging that, and then you'll actually see him flick left and right. I would prefer for him to actually move a little bit more slowly and actually see that movement. So rather than just using the move 150 steps block, we're going to pick one of the other motion blocks called glide. Okay, glide is a little nicer than most of the basic movement blocks because rather than just happening instantaneously, it asks for a time frame and then an ending position. So what happens is it'll actually animate our character from their start position to this ending position over however many seconds we've specified. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually move, since we know what our beginning position is, I'm going to move Scratch kind of to his ending position. And our glide block will update with that new position. And then I'll snap that to our current blocks. So now he'll jump back instantaneously to his original spot, but then he'll glide over the course of 1 second to his new position. Okay. I'm actually going to shorten that time maybe a little to half a second, just so he moves a little bit more quickly. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the soccer ball. So instead of just having our generic move block, I'm going to have the soccer ball glide to its new position. So let's reset our soccer ball. Reset Scratch the Cat too. And then I'll move the soccer ball into the goal. And put our glide block there. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, obviously, this isn't much of a game right now because you click the flag and he kind of does his thing right away. It's probably not very exciting, and it's actually not even very accurate because the ball starts moving before he even gets there. So we need to make a few changes to our program so far. Now, one of the things that we've seen is that Scratch, when you click on something, it does all of the steps immediately. And another thing that is important to know is that it does these instructions very, very literally. So if I decided to change this soccer ball to move, rather instead of right when the game starts, I want to wait until Scratch the Cat actually touches the ball, I can go into our control section and actually use these blocks here called if blocks. And if blocks, are you guys familiar with programming? Have you done any programming before?
We've done the hour of code.
Okay. So then you might even be familiar with these if blocks. It's literally just saying check this condition, and if that's true, then do this. If not, just don't do anything. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move that if block around my glide block, and I'm going to check to see first if Scratch the Cat is touching the ball. If he's not touching the ball, there's no sense in making it move. Okay? And to determine if he's touching the ball, I can do a few different things. I can do some basics that just check to see if he's in a certain X position or a certain Y position. But Scratch actually gives me these special blocks called sensing blocks that will allow me to determine if that sprite or that item is touching something, if it's touching a specific color on the stage, if the mouse is in a certain position, if I have a key pressed on the keyboard. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this first block called touching. And the touching block has a drop-down that lets me pick the mouse pointer. So it's Scratch the Cat, or in this case, since my soccer ball is selected in the sprites panel, is the soccer ball touching the mouse? Is the soccer ball touching the edge of the screen? Or is the soccer ball touching Scratch the Cat? Okay? So I'm going to see if it's touching Scratch the Cat, and that's what I'll use as my condition for my if block. Okay? So again, when we start our game or our Scratch project, it'll set the size of the ball, it'll reset the ball to that position, and then it'll check if the ball is touching Scratch. And if it is, it'll move our ball into the goal. So this is probably the most basic style of game that we could possibly have. So let's click that and see what happens. Okay? So we start the game, and he kicks it into the goal. Okay. Now, right off the bat, you might see a problem with this kind of setup here, in that if I move Scratch the Cat somewhere else, the ball suddenly stops moving.
See, he touched it right there.
Okay.
Okay, so do you know what the problem is? Can you see what the issue with our code is so far?
It's like super tiny for us to see it.
Let me see if I can. Here's this window. And then see if I can zoom in on this. Here, let me zoom in on here.
There we go.
See that?
Mm-hmm.
Not quite. It's even simpler than that. Scratch, like most programming languages, literally does exactly what you tell it to do. It doesn't do anything more than what you tell it. And in this case, we've told it to check for whether or not Scratch the cat is touching the ball.
But we didn't tell Scratch to touch the ball.
Well, we kind of do.
Oh.
We kind of do because he's moving by it. But we only tell it to check that condition as soon as we click that flag. So our game starts, and Scratch gets reset back to the original spot. But when the game starts, he's not touching the ball. And the ball never checks again after that very, very first millisecond whether or not Scratch is touching it. Yeah, it doesn't reset. It doesn't check that condition again. It just checks it that very first time, and that's it. Because we haven't told it to do that. We've only told it, when you click the flag, check to see if he's touching it. And if he is, then cool. Otherwise, don't do anything, basically. So we need to go back into our control blocks and tell Scratch to repeat that check. Okay? And Scratch has a few different types of repeat blocks. The main ones that we're going to use are the repeat X block, which basically says repeat that step X number of times, and it defaults to 10. Or we have a special block called forever, which just does the same thing over and over and over and over and over again and continually checks to see whether or not that condition or whatever has been met. Now, we can use this forever block to check conditions. We can also, later on, we might have some items that basically just move in exactly the same way. You know, maybe it's a hockey puck or something, or a bird that flies left and right across the screen over and over again and it never stops. Those are perfect situations for forever blocks. And just like with the other blocks, you'll notice that when I move the block into place, it kind of changes size. It's stretching to match whatever I want. So I can actually repeat as many of these steps as I want. In this case, I only want it to repeat our checking step. So I'm going to squeeze it right in between our go-to and our if block, and you'll notice how it wraps around it. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So now if I start our game, it behaves exactly the way that we want it to. It doesn't do anything, but as soon as Scratch touches the ball, it kicks it into the goal.
It's a lot of thinking.
Yeah, it's very literal, but I mean that's coding.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're not actually writing out any actual code, but the logic is basically exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so far so good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now the last step is let's turn this, again, it's not going to be very complex. We're not going to have any scores or anything like that. We're not going to keep track of the points that Scratch is getting. But let's actually make it so that the player has to do something in order to start this whole process. Right now, we start the game and it kind of scores on its own, which isn't very fun and obviously isn't very interactive. So we're going to change it so that Scratch instead of jumping back to his start position, we're going to have him follow the mouse. Okay, so I'm going to pull off my go-to and glide blocks, and I'm not going to delete them. I'm going to keep them there just in case we need to reference them back or if we want to revert back to our game. Since these aren't connected to any of these event blocks, they're not going to fire when our game starts. They're just kind of hanging out here, not doing anything, but they're available for us if we want to use them for something else. And we're going to use, let's do a motion block and tell Scratch the cat to use the motion block go to mouse pointer. Okay. Now, just like our sensing block that we checked for touching, this also has a drop down where we can tell it to go to different things. So we can tell it to go to our soccer ball if we want it to, or we can tell it to go to the mouse pointer. I want it to go to the mouse pointer so that it'll just kind of follow it around. But again, if we start our game, the same type of thing happens. He jumps right to the mouse pointer, and then that's it. So we need to use one of those forever blocks again. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I'll snap that in there. And now he actually follows the mouse around as I move him across the stage. Okay? And now because our soccer ball, because the logic of the soccer ball was actually dependent on Scratch touching the ball, all we have to do in order to get our game to go is just touch the ball. We don't have to change any of our other logic because it was dependent not on his position or anything else, but just on him touching the ball.
It's cute.
So now we have a basic game. The player can start the game, move Scratch around the board, and kick the ball, and knock it into the goal. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do you guys have any questions so far?
Guys have any questions? No, we're good.
Okay.
Well,
Oh wait, Tom has a question. Hold on.
Sure, go for it, Tom.
are they going to have to download Scratch in order to do this?
Because Scratch is online, they'll have to set up, at the event, we'll actually walk them through setting up a brand new account. So if you guys want to, you can have them set up their own Scratch accounts, but they won't be able to use personal accounts at the event, just so that we don't have students preparing stuff in advance. We want them to start from scratch and make the game while they're there.
Can this be done at the event on iPads, or do you have to have a computer?
It does work on iPad. There's actually a Scratch app for the iPad, but we're going to kind of have everybody do it on the computer. The final result they'll be able to put on an iPad or an iPhone. In fact, part of the training is going to be, obviously our game right now is using the mouse as input, so if we put this on an iPad, it's not going to do anything because there's obviously no mouse. So we'll actually go in some of the later sessions and show how to do touch input. Okay.
So if we have iPads, but if we don't, do the kids bring their own computers, or how does that work the day of?
They can bring their own computers. We will have a limited amount of computers that ASU will provide so that students that don't have them can use them. But we definitely don't have 250 computers. So
right.
If the students want to bring their own machines, that's fine. They'll have to create a brand new Scratch account when they get there.
Okay. We have a couple. We just have more iPads, but okay.
Yeah. You're more than welcome to have them bring the iPads too, because that way they can actually test the games on the mobile devices while they're working on them. So that's helpful. We've had, even in the training sessions, we've had a few students or teachers in this regard that started making a project and then it didn't work on the iPad because some of the stuff that they did was dependent on, keyboard press or something like that. So it's good to have that so that they're testing it while they're working on it. Okay, just look through these a little bit. Some other things that you may want to do as far as the motion's concerned, we're pretty much done with this current session for now, but I just want to go over some of these other motion blocks. You can turn the character and rotate them as well, and that changes some of the behavior of the other blocks. So a big kind of differentiator, we've used that go-to block at one point, but we also use the move block. The move block moves the character in whatever direction they're facing.
Okay.
So you'll note he's kind of going diagonally right now.
Yeah.
The go-to blocks and these change x, y blocks, those affect the literal x, y coordinates, so they don't care about the direction or the orientation of the character. And then you can also point the character in a specific direction or point them towards something like the mouse pointer or the soccer ball. As you add other sprites, those will actually show up too. So there are some Scratch projects where like one character will chase another character or follow another character. You can do that by pointing them towards that character and then using the move block to move them in whatever direction they're facing. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Let's see what else. We've got some other basic blocks under the look section. This allows you to kind of type in whatever you want. For now, if we start our game, he says, I'm going to score a goal.
Okay.
Cute.
Yeah.
Okay, you can switch costumes. We'll actually get into costumes and backdrops next week, but if you guys want to play around with some of these other blocks, you can change the way the character looks. Scratch actually comes with a couple what are called costumes, which are basically just, you can change the image that's displayed. So if you want to make him walk, you can switch between these costumes. And then you can also change events for, instead of when we click the flag, you can set an event so that it has to wait for a key to be pressed on the keyboard. Again, this isn't going to be useful for our iPads and mobile devices, but it's useful for testing stuff out in the interim on the computer. Make sense?
Cool.
Okay. I think that's it. If you guys don't have any other questions, that's pretty much it for the first session. We
So
basically
tonight,
just want everybody
or whatever in the next week, should we practice and do this exact thing that you did to make sure we know how to do all these
Yes.
things?
Yes, and I would try, if you want to, some of the, it's not required because we're actually going to pick up from this exact spot next week. But what I've told some of the teachers, if they want to expand this a little bit by playing with some of the other blocks and maybe, you know, making a message pop up when you score the goal,
Right.
or, you know, just try and extend it out a little bit further with some of the other blocks that we haven't used and see if you can make something else happen.
Okay.
Okay.
Sounds good?
All right.
Before I let you guys go, I don't know if you've set up an account, if you watched the setup video at all, but I do have a chat channel at slack.com. It's sparkappleague.slack.com that I'm pretty much in all day. If you guys have any questions or issues or you need help setting anything up, I am in there literally from 7 a.m. till 6 p.m. at night. I can answer any questions or problems that you run into with Scratch or anything else related to Spark.
And we have a Slack account for our department. You can have more than one
Yes.
group within there.
Yes. Yeah, you'll actually get, I don't know if you guys can see my screen here. Just a second.
Oh.
Hello.
Hello.
Here's the Slack window. It'll just set up these little buttons on the left-hand side.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So you can switch between the different channels that you have available. I've made a channel, a private channel, just for teachers, so that's the one that you'll want to join when you get it. I sent out invites a little while ago, but if you need me to resend an invite to Slack or anything because it's private, just let me know and I'll send you guys an email.
Okay.
Okay?
All right. I think we're good. Thank you.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks for coming, guys.
All right.
And
Okay.
we'll see you next week. I'll post a schedule to the Spark website, okay?
Sorry. All right.